So as I mentioned, we have an exciting keynote panel today of all about unlocking the data to drive a smart region vision. I'm extremely excited about the panelists we have lined up for you today. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves in a little bit. I'm joined by my colleague and good friend, Brian Dean. Brian Dean, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I know we have people from all across the globe joining us, so that's super exciting, and we're incredibly excited that you chose to spend your time with us today. As Dom mentioned, my name is Brian Dean. I am the Executive Director of the Institute for Digital Progress, a nonprofit here in our region that works alongside cities on smart city technology implementations and development. And as part of that work, also the program manager for the Connective, which is our Greater Phoenix Smart Region Consortium group, which brings together a lot of the partners that are here on the call together to build a smart region here in Phoenix. So super excited. Data plays a huge role in everything that we do. So really enthused to be here and be talking about all this stuff with you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And we just wanted to go over some numbers with you because this is the third year of the Smart Region Summit that we've combined with Shaping EDU and to create this Winter Games. And the whole point of this collaboration between the two organizations was to go global, right? The first year we held a really hyper local conference with a lot of just local leaders. The second year we went a little bit broader. We pulled in, people from around the nation. And this year, with the Winter Games, playing on the aspect that the Olympics has been pushed, we really wanted to go global and bring in the dreamers, the doers from around the world, the people that are on the front lines, rolling up their sleeves and really getting the work done, bring them together for a global conference to share, learn, and really enjoy each other's company. And so I just want to showcase some of the numbers that we've been able to hit. If you haven't seen this yet, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, I think, these numbers have only increased after 2 days. I think we're up over 1,200 participants, all from around the world. Kim, I think I just saw in the chat that you're joining us from Australia today. That's absolutely phenomenal. We've got 80 coaches, which we're deeming coaches as presenters. So again, this idea of having people that are getting the jobs done, those doers from around the country, talk to us about what they're doing. We have 80 different presenters telling us their stories from around the world. Over 60 activities. If you're like me, you probably need a strong one of these this morning because you've been participating in a lot of these activities, but it's really great to see all the momentum that's being built. And of course, none of this would have happened without all the organizations that have come together to collaborate to put this on. So we have 15 different co-conveners or organizations actually helping to lead this initiative. And of course, as I mentioned, Australia, we have participants represented in 6 continents. As Dean Sylvester said, I think on night 1, hopefully we'll get 7, and who knows, maybe we'll get the moon next because we can. So special shout out to those organizations, as I mentioned, that helped us put this on. So huge shout out to Cox Business for being the diamond sponsor of this. Without you and your support, none of this would have happened. And of course, also the ASU and the University Technology Office, you have been absolutely wonderful. Thanks for your leadership in getting this idea up and off the ground. And of course, as Brian mentioned, he is the program manager for the Connective, which is our Greater Phoenix Smart Region Consortium. Thank you all. Of course, we have our other fabulous sponsors as well. Again, none of this would be possible without your support. So thank you for what you've done throughout the entire week, not only hosting sessions, but bringing in your network to join us. And of course, our bronze and copper sponsors as well. So thank you to everyone. And as I mentioned, I just wanted to kind of hit on this aspect real quick because over the last 2 days, it's really kind of opened my mind to what we're actually doing here. So as we mentioned, the Shaping EDU program, it's largely bringing together the education network, right? The learners, the facilitators, the instructors. And with the Connective, what we usually do is we bring together the local government leaders, the technology leaders, the people that are working in the urban environment to help improve the quality of life. And what we really wanted to do by bringing these two organizations together is really explore those unique opportunities for collaboration across the two different perspectives and find ways that we can maybe work together in the future to really drive impact at scale. And so I think, this idea of building smart campuses, smart cities, smart regions, and hopefully eventually a smart world, it's something unique. And I really hope that you've all felt that kind of excitement throughout the 3 days. And of course, none of this would have been even close to possible without the amazing kind of events team that's running all of this behind the scenes. I mean, I don't know how you've been able to keep me organized over 3 days of all this, but you've done such a phenomenal job. I feel like it's gone off without a hitch, and special thank you to that team who's doing all that. Really, really glad to be a part of such a great organization and such a great team. So without further ado, you didn't come here to hear me speak. So we'll have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful panelists today. Have you give a little bit of a background on yourselves, what you're doing before we hop into the broader conversation. So without further ado, Mayor Woods, would you like to lead us off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm Corey Woods, Mayor of the City of Tempe since July 2nd of 2020. I also was a City Council member in Tempe from 2008 to 2016, and I also currently serve as the Chief of Staff for ASU Preparatory Academy. I've been there since November of 2016, so I've been with ASU for a little over 4 years now. So I'm just really excited to be here today. Just looking forward to hearing from all the panelists and all the guests.
Awesome. Thanks, Mayor. Really appreciate it. Dean Wentz, how about you go second?
Thanks, Dom. My name is Libby Wentz, and I am the Vice Provost and the Dean of the Graduate College at Arizona State University. I've been with ASU for this is my 24th year, so I've been here for a long time, seen a lot of changes, and I'm really glad to be part of this discussion today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dean. How about David, over to you?
Dom, thank you very much indeed. I've never been described as a dreamer or a doer before, but it's an exciting description. I'm delighted to be speaking to you guys here from the UK, representing the UK's national standards body. My name is David Cuckow. I am head of digital within our sector teams. For those who don't know who BSI is, we are a global provider of assurance services. We're in about 50 countries globally, but we are also the UK's only national standards body. I sit within the NSB as head of digital, and I'm responsible for all of our national and international standards development programs. So I run all the committees who are sort of digital first, I guess. So AI, blockchain, telecommunications, all of those different standardization programs have been developed nationally and internationally. But I'm also involved in working with both UK governments and international governments in terms of sort of future gazing, looking at what are the new big topics that are coming down the line that may need some form of good practice and standardization to be developed. And working with those organizations on developing those standards. We have an MOU with the UK government, so we're a not-for-profit organization, and our role really is to provide a public function for the UK economy nationally and internationally. And we published a whole range of smart city guides and best practice, which have now been adopted internationally through ISO IEC. So we truly are a global organization. We're working with lots of international cities and are in a very good position to provide a unique perspective, I guess, sort of internationally on the quite diverse challenges that cities are facing when they're trying to develop best practice and good practice in becoming smart.
Fantastic, David. Appreciate it. Sounds like you're a perfect, BSI is a perfect organization to represent at the Winter Games. And we're all dreamers and doers right now, right? I love it. Patricia, last but definitely not least, please introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Patricia Solis, and I'm the Executive Director of the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience at Arizona State University, which is funded by the Virginia G. Piper Trust. Our director is also Dean Wentz, who is here on the panel with me. I'm so honored to be on the stage, the virtual stage with all of you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm also an associate research professor of geography in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. So I really love data. And what I love to do with data is to liberate it, map it, and then share the knowledge and meanings that we create from it.
That's awesome. This is going to be a fantastic panel. As you can see, I don't think we could have put together a better group to talk about the importance of data, especially in smart cities, both locally at a local city level, but then globally as well. So let's roll up our sleeves. Let's jump right in. So Mayor Woods, I'm going to come back to you. So congratulations again on becoming the mayor of Tempe. in July 2020. My guess that the first 6 months in the job have been very different to what you imagined at the time you were out campaigning. But the city of Tempe has really become well known for using data to drive decision making. Are you able to speak to why Tempe has embraced such a data-centric modality and how data is being used on a daily basis within your office and really across all city departments?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, this has been a very interesting first 6 months of my tenure. I mean, everything from, the pandemic to I got COVID 4 or 5 days before my swearing in ceremony. So I had to have the first virtual swearing in of any mayor in Tempe city history. I mean, a train derailed in my first 2 weeks, by Tempe Town Lake. So it was, I was thinking, what in the world did I get myself into? So yes, it's been a very interesting first year on the job. What I can tell you is that data is critically important in terms of just sort of being able to back up your decisions. And with everything going on with COVID right now, we absolutely make sure that we use data in terms of what city facilities stay open or what kinds of public safety or public service announcements we have to put out there into the community. Well, we think it's vitally important so people know that we're not playing politics and we are actually basing decisions on data. And I think that's critical. I can also tell you, I mean, we are, as you said, we're very known for making decisions based on data. We also recently received a gold level certificate from What Works Cities, which evaluates how city leaders effectively use data and their decision-making processes. And it's a huge deal. We were only one of 8 other cities to actually achieve gold level with What Works Cities. And I think that's huge in terms of talking about how Tempe uses data to make decisions on behalf of our residents. The other thing that we also do is we use something called the Open Data Portal, and it's an interesting process. It was actually brought back by Councilmember Lauren Kuby from a National League of Cities conference. It's open to the public, and it actually shows the accumulation of the city's 5 main strategic priorities and over 100 plus strategic measures that identify how we achieve those priorities. So our strategic management division, they're the ones who actually help each department determine what we're going to measure and how to measure it from city benchmarks to state benchmarks, and thereon and thereforth. So the measures include everything from the Tempe Fire Medical Rescue Department, kind of measuring their response times, to trust in our police department, pavement quality on our streets, and even the ability to participate in city decision making. And so that's something we do on a regular, consistent basis. And I think that our residents really appreciate us not only sort of talking about these things internally, but talking about them very openly. Lastly, I would just say that, during the budget process, which is coming up in the spring, all of these measures are outlined for both myself and the entire city council through a participatory budgeting tool. So we have like an imaginary, and I just did this process. They give us an imaginary $100. It's kind of like Monopoly. And we sort of divvy up that based on what are the measures that we want to see the city focus on from a public policy standpoint. So people can, do them in $1 increments and kind of spread the peanut butter in a thin way, or you can do them in $5 or $20 increments and say, I really want to stack the deck to make sure that my issue rises to the top. So it's very interesting to see how each council member chooses to prioritize their dollars and therefore prioritize certain public policy issues. But that means that we actually talk about these things. It really is participatory, and we give the residents a full window into how that process happens so they know exactly how we come to our decisions and how therefore the staff ends up implementing what we talk about. So it's a very interesting process, but we really do believe that sunlight really is the best disinfectant, but showing residents the data that we use is really helpful in making sure that people know when it comes to talking about people in politics like myself, that the decisions being made are not based on politics, but they are actually based on the data, and that therefore drives our decision making.
Great.
Excellent. Yeah, that's incredible work, Mayor Woods. And I congrats again on the gold level certification from What Works Cities. That's critically important for our region, and your city is really helping even drive that momentum, or take that momentum and drive expansion in other cities and how they're using their data too. So, congratulations again, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so hearing a little bit about how communities are starting to use data, I want to transition over to Dean Wentz. So Dean Wentz, you're the director and PI for the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience here at ASU. Would you be able to share a little bit about the history of the CUR and your future vision for the CUR?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So first of all, I'm a proud resident of the city of Tempe and very pleased for the work that that you're doing, Mayor Woods. Really, really grateful for it. I've been following all the newsletters that I get, so I really appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Kerr by going back to the 1980s, which is going to sound a little bit strange. From my own personal perspective, because I really appreciate what Mayor Woods said about data for decision making. And I want to share in terms of how I envision Kerr by talking about some of the work that I was doing in the 1980s. At that time, I was working for the University of Rhode Island, and I was working for a project called the Narragansett Bay Project. I think I saw somebody on here who's from Boston, so probably that person knows Narragansett Bay. Maybe others do as well. But at that time, there were policies in place that said after a rainfall of a certain amount, the beaches and the fishing in Narragansett Bay were closed for 3 days. Because there were what are called combined sewer overflows, which means that the sewage system in the state did not have enough capacity to handle some of the, the rainfall. And so there were water pipelines that went directly into Narragansett Bay, putting pollution levels into that area. And they said, well, to make sure that our fishing and our swimming is safe, we're going to make sure that people stay out of the water for 3 days. Well, a lot of the fishermen in the area, which of course was an important revenue source for them, as well as the tourist industry, said, well, this is ridiculous. How do you know that it's, 3 days either makes it safe, or how do you know that 2 days isn't okay? And so I was hired as a geographic information system analyst, GIS analyst, which of course nobody even really knew what that was at the time, and probably everybody here knows what that is now, to actually answer that question with data. And so I paired up with a team of people who went around, collected water samples after rainfalls of different levels, mapped them out, and we came to the conclusion, which I don't think is going to surprise anybody here, is that it depends. You can't necessarily say we're going to close it for 3 days and everybody is safe. Of course, it depends on where you are relative to those combined sewer overflows. So if you're closer to them, then you're potentially more at risk. It also depends on the amount of rainfall that has happened. And so there were actually concrete changes in policy that said, if the rainfall is between this amount and this amount, it's closed for these days. And it even varied on geographic location. So this was, before people were really talking about, open data portals and, all the kinds of data stories that we have and we depend on now. And I don't know what the changes have been made since then. This has been, at least 3 decades since we made those decisions. But at that time, they made some concrete changes to policy on for the fishing industry as well as the tourism industry, based on data and based on substantive analysis. And the reason that I tell you this concrete story is that it actually set the seed in motion and set the mental ability in motion for me going forward. It's always been sort of part of my work. I worked for a couple of years on deforestation in Costa Rica. And I've been at ASU for now more than 2 decades, working a lot in the Maricopa County area. So when this opportunity with the Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust came up to look at community resilience, to be able to talk about how do we make communities more resilient, the first place that I said is that we need data to be able to make these decisions. We have data in a lot of different places, but as Patricia's going to talk about later, it's not necessarily liberated. In other words, it's not necessarily all pulled together from the different kinds of sources. Data are in different silos, and people don't necessarily have access to all the data they need to be able to make those decisions. And so I made two specific decisions about this project. And one is that it's going to be data driven, and that it's going to be making data available to the people who need to make the decisions. I don't want to be in the position to make any decisions. Just like my Rhode Island example, I didn't make the decisions on what those policy changes were. I leave it to, the policymakers, but I provide the infrastructure and the data to help support those. I'm not a lobbyist. I don't write legislation, but I can at least provide the information and the insight. And the second part of the knowledge exchange for resilience, the Piper Project CUR, that I think is also really important relative to data is about connecting the people. Part of our effort is about creating a network of organizations who can then look at the data and look at what it is they're doing. They can ask really critical questions about data, like who has access to the data? What are our privacy concerns related to it? We can't just go, report, electrical usage by individual households and put it up on the web. There are privacy concerns associated with it. We also have discussions with our network of people on how the data should be presented, how it should be made available with respect to, visualizations, what's downloadable, what is just available as images, as maps, as tables and charts. And last I'm going to say, and this is something I kind of already said, is how the data provide connections between organizations. I don't see data is a really powerful tool, and the more that it's disseminated and shared, then we have more opportunities for equitable futures. So those are my introductory remarks on this. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. I love hearing those kind of tangible examples of how data is being used to actually, create those connections, like you mentioned, either internally or even externally, where we're actually changing behavior and creating new standards and new baselines for action and decision making, like you said. So someone that's completely familiar with the idea of standards, I'm going to transition over to David from the British Standards Institute. And David, I want to ask you, why are standards so fundamental to smart cities or a smart region vision? And what types of data do you see being the most important to cities that are pivoting to trying to become a smarter community?
That's a very short question, which is very difficult to answer. And it's probably not a short answer. I guess I'll take it in two parts. So the one is, why are standards fundamental to cities, regardless of whether they're smart or not? And then the other question was around the types of data that are important to cities. I wasn't going to say this, but actually, given we're stepping backwards, I'll step right back to 1907. And in 1907 was when BSI was founded. And it was founded because there was a bunch of very innovative organizations rolling out trams across the City of London. And there was many different tram organizations, and they were digging up the streets and they were putting trams down. But if you wanted to get from one end of London to the other end of London, you had to get on one tram and get off and get another tram and get off and get another tram and get off and get another tram. So it was a very lengthy process. And if you got outside of London, it got even worse. And the reason why was there was no common approach to the gauge for those trams. So everybody developed their own gauge size, the measurement between the different tram lines, and there was no agreement on consensus on what those tram lines should be. So BSI was formed, and we brought together those communities, including the City of London, and we developed a common standard for the gauge of trams. So why is that relevant to this conversation? Well, the challenge was at the time is that we had to dig all the streets back up again and then relay those tram lines. And I think there is some big lessons learned from that, in the fact that, we need to agree common approaches and good practice as we start to roll out sort of system of systems for cities to support data infrastructure. And it is absolutely vitally important we get that right in the first instance, to avoid us having to, repeat, spend or rebuild what we've done in the past. And somebody mentioned a lovely phrase to me, which is reality eats innovation for lunch. You can have all these great, fantastic ideas, but if you haven't really thought it through, you're going to hit some real challenge in the future. We live in some really quite difficult times at the moment, particularly for cities, and as governments, ecosystems, industry, and stakeholders will start to kind of consider and deliver what our sort of city infrastructure application and service transformation is in the future, there's going to be some pressure, but also some opportunities to really start to kind of accelerate the thinking that has already been happening around that kind of cultural change to kind of deliver sort of smarter, more effective, more secure cities in a collaborative way. And of course, increasing a focus on consensus best practice. Now, I use the word best practice as opposed to standards because having a formal standard is a standard, but but also best practice, some form of framework or guidance or code of practice also is a standard, and that could be something that's developed locally within a city that could be shared. And this is also obviously a way of trying to achieve this accelerated change and this cultural change to move towards a smart city and perhaps a more kind of rapid way of making that change happen. And why is it important? Because standardization is more than just writing standards. It is about creating common, repeatable approaches that kind of leverage knowledge and allow us to work more effectively, more efficiently, more secure and more trusted, to allow us to kind of deliver that kind of repeatability of that transformation process in a more effective way. In terms of data, the amount of data that is available it's enormous, it's immense, and it's really quite diverse. And I think what we're seeing really, I guess what we're advising and what we're seeing being developed from a standard approach and framework perspective is, if you're starting to look at developing the key performance indicators for a city, and they are very diverse, you've got to put the citizen first. It really is about people, and it's about people's outcomes, their well-being, their living, their enjoyment, their environment. And you've got to really consider what are the things that we want to deliver and the outcomes for our citizens. Then look at how we measure that performance. So what are the kind of key performance indicators across all the different themes in the city, whether they be transport, social care, environmental, energy, etc. And look at how we want to measure those, but then look at how we want to interact. What interventions do we want to take? Because just measuring something is one thing, but you want about an intervention around that measurement. If, for example, we have population growth and we want to change demographics, we can measure it, but what are the interventions we want to take? So for me, really, it's around, yes, we can collect lots of data. Yes, we can create lots of diverse data sets, but we really need to focus on what are those service changes we want to make to support our citizens? What are the key performance indicators that we want across our different themes and services that are relevant to our citizens?
Yeah, those are some really amazing points, and I love kind of what you were able to do at the very end of that is kind of really help break the process down for cities, because I think, as you mentioned, some of the biggest challenges is there is an enormous amount of data. And so where do we get started? How do we even get started? And I love what you were just able to lay out and kind of start with the people and then work your way through the process. So I think that was great. And another point I just want to touch on before moving on is something you said about reality eats innovation for lunch. I thought that was brilliant. And I also thought what a perfect juxtaposition between what we've been talking about through these 3 days, the dreamers and the doers, right? You can't just be one or the other. I think there's that fine line in the middle. And I think that's what that saying really tries to get at, is you can't just be a dreamer, because if you have no idea of the reality of the situation or the processes or the operational structure, then you'll never get any of those big dreams done. And you can't just be a doer without thinking big and really setting some, high reaching aspirations out there. So I love that saying. And I think it's something that has been kind of flown or gone through this entire conference to date. So thanks for those comments. Patricia, moving over to you. Let's talk about those doers, some actual projects going on. So the CUR team, has been working on, as we know, a number of really interesting programs in 2020, including one relating to deaths in mobile home parks in the greater Phoenix region here. Given that smart cities really is about improving the quality of life for all people. Are you able to share with us a little bit about those projects, your findings, and how you really see the work informing local government policy, you know, maybe for Mayor Woods or other cities around the region or even around the world, right? Because we want to take these findings and obviously share it with cities everywhere. Can you talk to some of that?
Yes, Dominic, thank you so much. I'd be very happy to. I'd like to reiterate first a little bit of what David said, you know, about trust and the people. And we're really fortunate with the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience to be able to work in an environment where there is a lot of trust among organizations. We feel like that is really a big key to our success in being able to exchange and share the data. And it is important to think of the data, I guess, as the fuel for that first mile of research, not just, you know, the way to come to solutions, but we like to think of it as a way to define what are the problems that we should be looking at in the first place. A smart city is a resilient city, and a resilient city is one that can look ahead and anticipate where are our vulnerabilities and try to address them. And data is the fuel for us to be able to do that. And so I'll give you that one example, very tangible example that you mentioned. And it, I think, illustrates also what Dr. Wentz was talking about in terms of, you know, uniting data as the way that we can unite the different sectors of society. So when we think about resilience in Maricopa County, one of the shocks and stressors that we deal with chronically is the heat in the summer. That is something that comes about every year, and there's many different ways to address that, but we're still grappling with how to make sure that all of our cities, our citizens are living in a safe, livable environment. And so that was one of the first kinds of challenges that we took on when the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience was launched in 2018. So how can we understand how different people across the county are dealing with this shock and stress? And so in the spirit of liberating data, we had the good fortune to work with the Utility Assistance Network, which is a group of organizations, about 80 different organizations that provide assistance to people who need to, you know, some extra funds to pay for those higher bills in the summer, mostly. And we were able to liberate the data that they had collected on the people who were receiving assistance. Now, this is data that is really just operational. It's things that they collect. It's not really designed for research. And that's what I mean about liberating the data, you know, not only making it open, making those arrangements where we could share it in a safe, you know, as Dr. Wentz said, private way, but bringing meaning to that and research kinds of meaning. So we were able to map that data across the county on where people were looking for assistance. And then we overlaid that with the heat-related deaths data from the county, so official data source from the public health department. And so just comparing those to see where were people asking for help and where were some of the heat-related deaths. There was some place that stood out to us where there was a lot of heat-related deaths, but people were not asking for help. And it was actually quite puzzling. And we went through then this process of kind of creating some knowledge and meaning around that. And come to find out, those were sites where there were a high concentration of mobile home parks. Now, it makes sense when you realize that the federal dollars, like the LIHEAP dollars for utility assistance, are not eligible for people who live in mobile homes. The structures are not eligible. Oftentimes, the mobile home owners might be not direct customers of the utilities, so they might not be able to access those kinds of programs that exist. Their homes, they own their homes, but they rent the lots, and they're basically on parking lots, you know, homes on parking lots. And so the tree programs, the wonderful tree programs that are available across the city really don't apply to them either. So somehow they were falling between the cracks. There are many actors working on this, heat resilience and all of these different programs, but they were not visible until we could gather, liberate the data, and show that this was a hidden vulnerability in our community. And turns out, working with the county to release some of the details of that data, mobile home residents are 8 times more likely to die of heat-associated deaths than people of the same in other types of housing. So this was not known widely across the community because it was not really a constituent of all the many actors that are working so hard. So we've really launched some challenge within ASU, design challenges. You know, there are solutions out there. They're not designed for this, but we've been able to assemble a large number of stakeholders around this to pull that together and design some solution sets around, well, what would it look like for this particular community? People who live in mobile home parks tend to be maybe older in some places. There might be an inequity issue in other places. And so where can we learn a little bit more about this? And one of the other interesting data collection modalities that we have is a program called Heat Mappers that, you know, Dr. Wentz, a great name, started that a couple of years ago, where we were able to place temperature kit gauges for citizen science data collection in people's homes to be able to assess exactly what they were experiencing. And from that, we were measuring indoors degrees in the hot heat of summer, and really validating and verifying what we were dealing with and what types of solutions we needed to put together for them. So uniting the official data sets, the liberated data sets from nonprofits and organizations that might not normally do that, from the citizen science data sets, and bringing them together around this shared concern. All of Maricopa County should be concerned about this. We want to make sure that we have affordable housing that people can live in for our economic development goals. I think that we can all come together around, you know, that newly discovered or rediscovered issue that the data really helped us develop. I call it the aha, duh moment. It's one of those, oh, we didn't realize this, but of course, this makes a lot of sense. So it was really gratifying experience to be able to share with that information and the information that we had pulled together with the New America team around housing loss, evictions and foreclosures, which is really an important issue right now. We were able actually to share with the city of Tempe and Mayor Woods not too long ago, and thanks to Lauren Kuby with that. And you know, like Dr. Wentz said, we share all these things that we're learning in that knowledge exchange kind of format, and then it makes it accessible to decision makers. And I believe they took some immediate action on being able to activate some programs around people who might not have been aware of some of the resources of the city. I know also the city of Mesa actually sent the fire department out this summer to with water bottles to the mobile home parks, which is something they hadn't done before because of learning about these kinds of issues. So
yeah,
I'll stop there.
That's perfect. No, those were perfect examples. And I think a perfect transition, Mayor Woods, I'd love to come back to you on something that Patricia talked about heavily in that example, was that was just an amazing partnership to really solve a real world challenge facing our cities and our region, right? And I think that's, again, a theme that's been flowing through this entire conference, is this idea of collaboration as the next competitive advantage. It's going to take partnerships to really help solve these pressing urban issues. And it goes back to also something I think Dean Wentz mentioned in her opening remarks about this idea of infrastructure separate from decision making, right? And I think a lot of times when cities are looking to leverage data, you know, sometimes they don't have the entire expertise in-house, they don't have the resources in-house to really be able to, as Patricia mentioned, unlock or liberate the data to make informed decisions. And so partnerships are critical, right? And so Mayor Woods, maybe talk to us a little bit about the importance of partnerships, especially partnerships with an academic research institution like ASU, maybe some partnerships you've done in the past with ASU, but how that neutral research-based body to help provide the infrastructure to you then as a mayor to make those policy decisions. How important are those partnerships?
So I think it's critically important. You know, a couple of things. I mean, speaking about ASU, I had conversations with someone at ASU yesterday with regard to potentially partnering on a family advocacy center that would deal with situations like sexual assaults and child abuse cases. And that's one of those things where there was an article in the Arizona Republic, I believe a couple of months ago, talking about how the city of Tempe was one of the only areas within the region that didn't have our own sort of dedicated family advocacy center. And And so, ASU was mentioned in the article, but it's also been brought up on a task force that I have here in Tempe about public safety reform. So I'm talking with ASU right now about the possibility of developing a partnership in that area. We've also talked about partnering when it comes to human services needs and homelessness. So because ASU has some really incredible assets when it comes to resources and data and research, when it comes to how to really help people who might find themselves in a very difficult situation with regard to homelessness. And so we're talking about a potential partnership in that area as well. But we partner with other organizations too, like the Maricopa Association of Governments. That's our regional transportation planning entity. I had a conversation with them a couple of weeks ago about, road paving on the 101 freeway and just sort of other things regarding the Broadway Curve road project. So we talked to them about things such as that. We partner with people about, I talked about homelessness before, about with the Maricopa Association of Governments, about the point in time homeless count, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to do this year due to the presence of the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's just not simply safe to send people out there trying to actually count. But those counts of trying to figure out how many homeless people we actually have in our community on a regular basis is not only important to inform city policy in our residents, but it also helps when it comes to getting state and federal funding to get additional resources to make sure that we can truly actually help those who might find themselves on the streets or sleeping in a park. But we partner with groups like MAG on those things. And we also work with groups like the Arizona Technology Council. I mean, with the sort of emergence of Arizona's high-tech industry, it's really important that we continue to partner with them to make sure that cities, businesses, and all of our laws are currently up to speed, of course, with the rapidly changing nature of the technology world. So we are constantly working with organizations like that. I mean, Greater Phoenix Economic Council, when it comes to identifying, great businesses to either set up shop in the city of Tempe or relocate to Tempe or the Greater Phoenix area. So we partner with all of those organizations, whether it be Arizona State University, the Arizona Technology Council, Greater Phoenix Economic Council, Greater Phoenix Leadership. All of these organizations have a tremendous amount of assets and institutional memory that really can help to supplement a lot of what we might not have directly in-house at the city of Tempe.
Yeah, that's terrific. It gives me goosebumps to feel that kind of enthusiasm for partnerships, because you're right. No one can do this alone. It's really going to take a team playing on the Winter Games theme to really solve some of these challenges. Thank you, Mayor, for that kind of amazing leadership.
Yeah, and thank you both, Patricia and Mayor Woods, for kind of sharing about that engagement between ASU, the city of Tempe, and the other kind of non-governmental regional planning partners. We've talked a lot about how data can be this connection both internally and externally. So I want to go back to Dean Wentz and ask about how is the CUR engaging with other programs across ASU, even internally, to leverage the strengths and of these programs and people to drive this continuous innovation and kind of new models for acceleration across ASU even.
So thanks for that question. That's actually, and the list is long, so it's going to be, it's going to take up the rest of the time this morning. No, I'm just kidding. So that's actually one of the priorities that we have with respect to this, and I'm going to point to one in particular, because it builds off a little bit of what Mayor Woods was saying. There's a project called Healthy Urban Environments, called an acronym is HUE, that actually focuses on the physical environment with respect to air quality and heat across Maricopa County, led by Matt Frazier and Chuck Redman. And we have actually a really deep partnership with this particular project because of our alignment around heat. But they're focusing on things like, cool parking lots, the pavement project that was mentioned before, in terms of working with different constituencies around the university in terms of designing, testing out new pavement technologies for heat mitigation. Other forms of heat mitigation also with respect to, trees and other kinds of structures, but also with respect to the human part, looking at, heat-related governance. And so we're very much in touch with them in terms of, working a deep partnership with them. We've got some that are an example like that are deep partnerships. And then we've got other ones that I would call, it ranges from these deep partnerships. And in fact, with that one, we have a research professor that is jointly funded by our two projects. That shows sort of the level of deep commitment between those two projects. But then we have other projects that go all the way to the other extent. And I think this is really important to point out, that is much more of a loose relationship. You know, we make sure that they're invited to the activities that we have. For example, Lodestar, which is the nonprofit organization in the Watts College that provides training for nonprofits. A lot of our work relates to nonprofits, but we make sure that the team at Lodestar is very knowledgeable about what it is that we're doing. We don't have quite that same joint mission and joint partnership, but we have awareness of what we're doing. So we've got a long list of partners that range from what we can call loose ties to deep ties, and the different levels of collaboration and connection that fall in between those. And the loose ties, they feel sometimes like, oh, we got to make sure that, you know, we have to actually keep a database of who our loose ties are to make sure that we stay connected, because it can be overwhelming. But when challenging situations arise, you know, like the pandemic, you really can draw on those loose ties to sort of say, oh, I actually know that, you know, that organization, and you make that connection. And so it's really important to be able to establish sort of those range of relationships. And we have them built as best as we can in a very large, complex organization like ASU. And then we extend that same philosophy to our community partners. We have some very deep ties. I'm working very closely with the Salt River Project, SRP, on a regular basis, that we have kind of like our relationship with Hugh. And then we've got some partnerships that are what we would call, again, more loose ties, that have been incredibly valuable as we've been, you know, facing the pandemic, making, pivoting, adapting, and really supporting and serving our community through this crisis. So that's my response.
I think it was a fabulous response, because, you know, just like cities, I think ASU too, just the massive size in the different departments of the different teams, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to just understand kind of the complete amount of skills and resources that are within your own organization. So I love that idea about loose ties. And it's funny, you know, yesterday's keynote, we had a lot of the professional sports organizations on talking about the future of sports. And at the end, the coach from the professional soccer team said, I love this because now I have an introduction to these other professional teams here that I didn't have before. And now I feel more comfortable to reach out with any questions or comments or concerns. So I think this whole idea of building those loose ties and building the relationships is really going to be what makes us successful moving forward. So thank you for that. I thought that was fantastic. So David, I want to pivot to you now for a second. You know, as we work with a lot of cities, you know, talking to a lot of mayors, talking to a lot of city managers, something that comes up a lot is, again, a framework to help drive their decision-making moving forward. And one of those frameworks that we've heard over and over again that a lot of the cities want to follow is the sustainable development goals. And so can you maybe talk to, from the BSI perspective, and maybe some of the engagements that you're working with cities around the world, you know, how can cities or even other organizations use data to really drive the integration of these sustainable development goals over time for cities? How can they use that as a framework for action?
Yet again, a very complex question. There's probably some short and very long questions to that. Yeah, we at BSI also follow the Sustainable Development Goals as well in terms of our interactions globally as an organization, looking at things like sustainability, net zero, etc. I think it still fundamentally goes back to, you know, what is the outcome that I'm trying to achieve, and how does the Sustainable Development Goals help our citizens, and how does it directly impact and affect the people who live within our city and our region. I still think it comes back to that, and really understanding what are we trying to achieve how are we trying to provide service to our citizens? What do they need? Sort of versus then how do we meet those kind of more global key performance indicators around kind of net zero and sustainability. And BSI is doing a huge amount of work at sort of both ends of those scales, really looking at the kind of nitty gritty of how does a city deliver services and change through the application of technology and process, and how do you standardize that? And then looking to try and then link that into, well, okay, then how do you use that to then drive your net zero goals? It is a challenge. I think this is evolving, Dom. This is not something that sort of is there ready on a plate. It's something we've got to work to and with, and I love the word partnership, together to try and achieve this and understand it. I think one of the things that BSI has got to do, along with the kind of standards making community, is that things are changing so fast, you know, climate impact, risks and challenges around things like COVID and pandemics, you know, they're hitting us like a train here. And we can't be in a situation where we're taking 2 to 3 years, maybe even longer, to agree international standardization, because it can be quite a long process to achieve that. And what we're looking at as an organization is how do we work in a more agile way with cities and organizations and across that very complex supply chain to be able to adapt good practices and standards, both nationally and internationally, at speed. So at kind of the pace of the project or the solution or the service that is being transformed, we can develop and deliver that best practice to meet those goals in that time scale. I think if we don't do that, it will be quite challenging to then think about how do we sort of adopt the right standards, support the right policy to meet, for example, our sustainability and net zero goals.
Tremendously, yeah. That's sorry we keep feeding you these really big, audacious questions that obviously probably can't be answered in a quick remark. But I think the way you're laying it out, a practical approach is going to be very helpful. I'm looking at the attendee lists, and there's a lot of city leaders, city staff that's on here. So I love that approach, just being very practical. I'm trying to follow the chat a little bit. Patricia, I want to turn to you. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what it looks like you and Paul are going back and forth in this. Let's kind of double click on that idea of trust, especially with data. I mean, it's so critically important. I think, oftentimes as the general public, we tend to read the news, the media. You tend to learn about the bad stories that's happening with data breaches, using data in unethical ways. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of trust in data and how ASU and your work is kind of really helping to kind of reinvigorate that positive feeling of trust in data?
Yeah, at least we aspire to that for sure with the type of work that we do. Everything from the citizen science type approaches, like I mentioned, that we feel could offer an opportunity for residents to participate in that scientific process, the data collection process, and even we take the data back to them and some of the analysis and have them help us interpret that as participatory participants in that whole knowledge process. That offers us, I think, an opportunity to build trust and visibility. Mayor Woods talked a lot about the transparency, the openness. Those kinds of processes are really important. Also, the back to what Dean Wentz said about the weak ties, looking for those organizations that maybe we can share some data with who are non-typical types of organizations. You wouldn't think that they necessarily had data, like the Utility Assistance Network. This is not where we normally think of to go to for scientific data. The obvious partnerships and players that are really strong, like MAG and other places at ASU are and official data sets are really important too. But trying to unlock that creativity by liberating the data with those organizations, I think also demonstrates an ethic for inclusion, for equity, for diversity in the data itself. And I feel like those are ways that we're also trying to build that trust. There's obvious privacy and security kinds of concerns that everyone also deals with. But those are some of the creative ways that I think that we would recommend thinking about for anyone who's working with data.
Yeah, I think that's Really good point. And Mayor Woods, I think you said it at the very beginning of the panel about this idea of the best medicine is shining light on it and just being transparent and open about it, right? I think that really helps a lot, especially having, an elected official like yourself out there in front of people just talking about it. I found when we're first getting going on the smart city path, a lot of the challenge was there was a lot of unknowns, and so people didn't hear the elected officials really championing smart cities or data efforts. And so having a mayor out there continuously talking about the importance of leveraging data to make decisions is really important. And so maybe I can come back to you, maybe put you on the spot a little bit about your goals for 2021 and beyond. We talked a lot about KPIs in this discussion. Can you maybe talk to the panel and the audience about some of the key goals that you're trying to set with the city of Tempe in your first year as mayor and beyond?
So a couple quick things I can mention. I proposed an affordable housing initiative called Hometown for All that goes before the council a week from today, that a lot of housing advocates are already calling kind of the most aggressive policy proposed by a city in all of Arizona. So that's going before the council on January 14th, and I hope that gets approval. But that was one of the things that came about from an analysis that was done that looked at data and said, in order for the city of Tempe to keep up with the need for affordable and attainable housing, we're going to need 11,000 more units of housing by the year 2040. And so we looked at a data point and just sort of broke it down and said, we need to really accelerate this. And so that was sort of the impetus for that proposal on affordable housing. So that's one thing that's a huge deal to me and has been my entire career in public service. Also, I know I mentioned the homelessness conversation, where I think we may have a potential budding partnership with Arizona State University. And I'm also talking to a couple of my other colleagues, council members Joel Navarro and Doreen Garland, about working with me on that. So that's a big deal. Tempe is a city that actually spends a lot more money on homelessness and on human services than a lot of other surrounding East Valley cities. But we also, it seems to me, just from a visual, anecdotal perspective, have a lot more need than some other surrounding cities. So we're talking about now just not simply throwing money at a problem or quoting percentages, but really kind of doing a deep dive into the data and current best practices to see which ways we can really affect this issue. And so those are probably, for me, the two biggest things I'm really looking at going forward. Another interesting thing I could just throw out there, though, is, in the advent of all this COVID-19 pandemic stuff, the challenge of what is the right amount of office product to continue to be built in the city of Tempe. We are a real leader in the region and a hub for Class A office space, but the challenge really becomes with that, what are the office patterns going to look like during COVID-19 and even post-COVID-19? Are people going to go back to their offices the way that we once did when this is all over again? Because people are going to say, gosh, I have to get out of my house. I can't sit here anymore. I want to be around people. I mean, please put me around a water cooler somewhere. Or are people going to say, look, I'm still concerned about the virus or other viruses or this year's flu bug. And they're going to simply say, I want to stay home. And a lot of people aren't going to want to return to that office environment. So what is really the appropriate mix of the amount of office that we actually need in the city of Tempe to remain competitive, but also not to overbuild the office if work habits really do change as a result of the pandemic. So those are some of the things I'm looking at in the year 2021.
It's incredibly interesting. I saw a couple of the panelists nodding their heads. Anything to interject on that idea of understanding kind of that office market and what it's going to be in the future? David, I saw you nodding. Any work that BSI is doing around that?
Well, we recently ran a seminar on digital workplaces, and we had an interesting panel. We had the Leesman Group, who do a lot of research into kind of the future of real estate, and it was interesting that their research sort of said that. So they asked the question, would people want to return to the office? And they got sort of various sort of views, but actually they got a very high percentage of people saying they wouldn't want to return to the office, but it was not because of the pandemic. It was actually because the office wasn't a great place to work in the first place. And where the office was actually a really good place to work with the water coolers and the place to go and the call offices and the collaboration space, people were really keen to get in the office. So I do think we have to rethink the workspace. I think it's going to have to adapt and have to change. I do think, interestingly, technology has a great place to play for this. Particularly here in the UK, we're knowledge workers. So we don't make a great deal of things, but we actually think about a lot of things. So, we're very good in the services industry. So we as human beings are going into offices and using our brains to work. But actually, our current work environment really isn't that good for people to function in a thinking environment. And a lot of the work that's been done around this is quite theoretical about kind of well-being in work, and actually using data, real-time data, to monitor our environment, to then actually change our environment, to make it more effective, to make us more productive. One of the big challenges around changing and adapting the workplace and putting technology in is that the real estate developers won't spend the extra money. They won't spend another 5 or 10% on the cost of real estate to put in the technology because they don't think they're going to get a return. But if they can actually prove that their workspace is more productive and more safe, particularly more productive by deploying this new technology, then they'll get their return on investment because their real estate will increase in value. And I think there's quite a lot of thinking going on around that space at the moment, and lots of thinking around how do we use data in a more effective way to actually change the environment we work in and actually better monitor it in real time. And COVID is just accelerating that thinking because people want to feel safe. They want to feel that they can trust that their work environment is a good place to go, and they're not going to catch a cold or they're not going to catch a virus. But actually, if we can use that technology to drive productivity and well-being, that would be a game change.
Yeah, completely agree. And I want to kind of double click on something you mentioned there. It's this idea of using data in real time to be more effective with decision making. So maybe Dean Wentz, can you talk a little bit about this? Maybe me as an economic development director, I might not be a data scientist. I might not understand, the raw data as it's coming in and the trends that are happening. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of dashboards, especially for these key decision makers in cities, and how are dashboards being leveraged to do what David mentioned, make decisions using real-time data?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's fine and interesting that you call me Dean Wentz, which is great. And then I look at Brian's name, and if he ever becomes a dean, he'd just be
Yeah.
so, anyway, little sidebar thing. So we've been very active with developing data dashboards. Tableau, particularly, and other environments provide really great resources for it. And what it does is it really, again, two things. First of all, it allows you to take data from multiple sources. So in some ways, what Patricia has talked about in terms of really being able to pull data from a lot of different places and bring it together and actually create visualizations that are pretty powerful, that people can readily understand the data. When you get a data that's an Excel file with a whole bunch of rows and columns of numbers in it, it's really hard to digest. And unless you've got the skills to translate that into graphics and connect it with or do other kinds of analysis, it becomes pretty difficult to be able to do. And I'd be happy to share my screen if you would want me to show you a couple of examples.
Yeah, please do. That'd be fantastic.
Find it here.
Yeah.
Oh, and while I'm looking for what it is that I'm looking for, I actually was doing a quick scan. The state of Rhode Island has actually got a grant from EPA to actually correct those combined sewer overflows. And so they're actually making those changes. But that's, of course, a couple of decades later. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble.
I just mentioned, I forgot who mentioned it yesterday, but I thought it was really brilliantly said, where they're saying, startups tend to think in an hour by day basis, right? Because they could live and die based on the day. Larger technology companies, the Cisco's of the world, live in kind of month to year timeframes, and then the cities we live in, decades to decades timeframe. And how do we start to narrow those gaps between those, three different kind of timeframes? I thought that's a very interesting point.
Yeah. So I'm happy to share this link with everyone here on the panel, and maybe Patricia can do it while I'm talking. But this is the data dashboard landing page that the CUR team has created related to specifically to COVID, but other issues in particular. So of course, one of the concerns, and I know that Mayor Woods has talked about it, has been related to moratoriums on evictions as people are unable to pay for their rents. And so we've got a data dashboard on evictions, some connections on smart cities. This is one on temperature. So this, I'm gonna pull this one up in particular because this is the one that I know the most about. And so why are we concerned about temperatures here in Maricopa County? This visualization here at the top shows temperature trends from 1900 to 2018 by month. Here it is for Phoenix. For Mayor Woods, I'll shift it to Tempe. And you look at that and you're like, okay, maximum temperatures have gone up, you know, in June and July, kind of flat over the last 120 years. And so that doesn't seem so concerning. But the ones that are concerning are things like the minimum temperature. So look what's happened to the minimum temperature over the last 120 years. This is pretty alarming when we start to think about what are our minimum, what is happening with respect to our urban heat. Here's another visualization of the same kinds of data, looking at this over time. And so what you can see here in terms of the median temperature was below average, and what we're seeing up since the 1970s is that our median temperature has actually become higher. And so what this does is it confirms these trends that, oh, this one is still Phoenix, confirms some of these trends that we're worried about in terms of if these kinds of trends continue, we're going to be worrying about people who are homeless and don't have shelter, who are living in mobile homes, people who can't pay for their utility bills as energy prices continue to climb. And so this kind of data dashboard provides access to the information that says this is a pretty serious concern and we need to do something about it. And then, you know, so this is the kind of examples of the data dashboards that we're building. And I will get the link to everybody.
That's great. I think Patricia might have put it in the chat if it's the same one. Thank you. Perfect. It's amazing to see, you know, kind of what they can do with data. David, I'd love to, you know, again, we've been talking about the Phoenix region in Arizona. Are there any, you know, the goal here is obviously to network and find best practices all across the country and across the world. You know, are there any jurisdictions maybe outside of America that are really doing well in this data analysis, data governance that, you know, that we might be able to network with or share best practices with? Anything from your work with BSI that you'd like to highlight?
Yes, and I would love to hook you guys into the work that some of the other cities are doing internationally. There are many actually. There's a few here in the UK that are doing some great things with data. Actually, here in London, the GLA they have developed a London data store, and they've been developing it for the last sort of 3 or 4 years. And they're very similar to the dashboard we've just seen, that they started to bring in city data about sort of environmental, housing, social sort of economic impact, and they're delivering that for the use of the local authority, but also for people to see, you know, back to that thing around trust. You know, are we as a local authority delivering on the expectations that we set? And here's the kind of figures to prove that. They've done a lot of work around planning. So, you know, London obviously is a challenging place to build and expand into, and kind of looking where those hotspots are, where they need to develop, where are the kind of priority brownfield sites that they can actually expand on. Outside London, there's many UK cities doing some interesting things, but then internationally, we've been doing lots of work, and I mentioned earlier in South Korea, also China, although that can be a bit of a no-go depending on the country. But obviously they've been doing a lot of work around using data more effectively, developing and deploying some quite interesting new technology. They're quite well advanced in that perspective, and we've been trying to work internationally and collaborate with them around identifying what they're doing and how that could potentially be linked into areas in other parts of the world. There's lots of very interesting things going on. I think one of the big challenges, Don, that we see is that kind of pilot to scale challenge. You know, lots of really interesting sort of innovation happening. But what tends to happen is they don't go beyond the pilot phase. And there's many reasons why. Part of those reasons why I think it was not really being clear on what they were trying to deliver in the first place. We talked about kind of collaboration partnership with organizations, but I think you kind of got to be sometimes a little bit careful what you wish for. Vendors can offer you things for free. Always be careful why they're offering you things for free, because it tends to be they want something in return. And that's usually the data and access to that data. But also I think that the challenge really here is that, you know, it's often people sort of think about the kind of sexy technology, but don't actually think back to this sort of reality, sort of eat innovation for lunch challenge. You know, you got to think of the technology and the process change and the people change. It's a rounded challenge that needs to be considered when you're going out and deploying, you know, new solutions into whatever area that might be. But we're trying to do a lot of work internationally in around building city communities. I know you guys are hooked into the kind of EU sort of 100 cities program, which is fantastic. So we, in terms of supporting that, we're still engaging with the EU despite Brexit, guys. So so that hasn't gone away from a standards perspective. But it's actually how do we bring those communities together and share some of those really interesting projects that people are doing, because it really is all about knowledge share. If we can get people to learn from what everybody's doing, I think it will really help us accelerate the adaptation and development of this new technology for the good for us all.
Excellent. Thank you, David, for that input there. I think the whole idea of collaboration and best practice sharing is an absolutely critical part to advancing smart cities, right? And I took a few minutes and I clicked on that link shared by the Kerr team and was looking at the Smart City Metrics dashboard page. And first off, it's extremely impressive, but man, there's what, 200 or so identified metrics there that a city should be tracking, monitoring, working towards. So I wanted to pivot over to Mayor Woods and ask, you know, with so much kind of on our plate and that cities are responsible for, you know, what is the value of working together across jurisdictions, and how can we kind of use that collaboration to kind of, you know, the rising tide raises all ships sort of model, particularly when thinking about building smart regions, smart states, and beyond as we go.
I think it's important for some very basic reasons. I mean, one is because we have some really monumental challenges we have to tackle, not just simply as Tempe, but the entire region and our entire country. So I think that coming together to talk about ways that we can partner and help each other is really critical. But it's also so you don't duplicate efforts. That's one of the other problems sometimes that happens in situations like this, is that, one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. It becomes this whole thing about, well, the city's doing something, but we also have other nonprofits in the city who are also contributing to that work. Or I know people in the nonprofit world get frustrated about that. They're doing something, and then someone else, as opposed to kind of teaming up with them, decides to start another 501c3 that basically does the same exact work, and now they're competing for the same limited amount of dollars. So I think it's important because we really do have critical challenges that we have to address head on to really make our society a better place. But I think it's also to make sure that we are not duplicating efforts and fighting over a sort of very limited, piece of the pie here. I mean, so that I think it's important that we really do kind of, join hands, figure out what we need to accomplish, and do it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're super excited to be working with the City of Tempe and the connective framework to build this smart region. And you guys, your leadership has been, phenomenal and instrumental in everything that's been happening already. So we really, really appreciate that. transitioning over to Patricia, wanted to ask you kind of, what excites you about the work that the CUR is doing, and what kind of projects are you guys engaged in that you just are super excited about and really think could help make an impact in our region and beyond?
I'm going to cheat and say everything that we
Yeah.
do. We're not taking it on if it's not exciting, I can tell you. It's like drinking from the proverbial fire hose, as they say. But if I might first just, talk a little bit about that potential and then go back to something tangible, because of what Mayor Woods just said just now. I think in addition to seeing these opportunities as ways to improve efficiencies and reduce redundancies and really get our act together, and in addition to what I mentioned before about, those vulnerabilities, what you don't know that you don't know can hurt you, like I mentioned with the mobile home parks, there's this other thing that I heard someone very brilliantly call the other day, the wrong purse gap, the wrong purse problem, right? When we're all in our systems and our silos and we're not using our big data, collaborative data sharing kinds of power that we have, we might mistake inefficiencies and problems in one silo as being a problem with that silo. Whereas maybe it's downstream or upstream to other kinds of drivers or factors. We think about this always in a resilience framework, right? The quintessential example is the homeless human services system, because they are dealing downstream with a lot of drivers upstream, a very complex set of factors that lead to people losing their homes. The data, just with the homeless management information system, which we've done, you might not capture all of those upstream drivers unless you expand your view, use these really amazing data systems and analytic systems to try to be creative to break down those silos. And that's what leads me to another example of what some of the work that we're doing, which is still somewhat preliminary, but I think we're learning our lessons from the other approaches that we've talked about already. We are working with a large group of actors that is looking at those cross-system kinds of phenomenon, like with the housing, with the affordable housing, with rent assistance, utility assistance. Wildfire is one of the organizations that we're working very closely with, and trying to unite those things is really not unproblematic, right? Everyone has a different data dictionary. Everyone uses different ways to collect the data. It's not a trivial problem to just say, oh, let's put in a data lake and then throw everybody's data in there and then now we can analyze it. It's really not that simple. People sometimes use zip codes to, reference where something is happening, but some of the zip codes are really huge and don't really give you a good sense of how close they are to something in some other zip code, for example. So the data itself and constraints of the data itself is a real big problem. So some of the ways that we are trying to use the powerful, smart people at ASU to get past these kinds of things and really connect those silos is through things like machine learning, artificial intelligence kinds of techniques, through agent-based modeling. Like we have one right now that we're working on. It's trying to simulate how a person might move actually through those different human services systems without actually having to connect those different data systems. So on top of the data, like we've been talking about, I think we also have to think about those techniques and really using the power of analyzing that. The path from data to decision is not always just a straightforward, simple one, is what I guess the point would be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's so much more to go along with the data, other than just, kind of like you said, getting in a data lake and there we're done, we're good, right? There's so much more understanding and data integrity issues that we got to deal with, and standardization. And a lot of that comes with you really need to kind of understand how the data works and how to use it. And I know from our conversations with cities that sometimes the struggle is they don't necessarily have all the resources to do that. So I saw some interesting points in the chat, and I want to turn it back over to Dean Wentz to talk about maybe how ASU is starting to kind of fill that gap and work with the communities on providing education opportunities and resources kind of as a 1-2 punch to better learn and expand these data program initiatives.
So I addressed some of it. There's a lot of that kind of answer going on in the chat, which I think is
Mhm.
really good. And I heard like 95% of your question because I was reading some of the stuff in the chat. So I want to answer this first by looking why I was nodding when Mayor Woods was talking about the office space question in terms of post pandemic responses. Because one of the conversations that we're having pretty frequently now at ASU is what does post-pandemic higher education look like? You know, we've got people in this call from England and Australia, which I mean, I think that's, I don't know what time it is in those various places. But the questions are, you know, how are we going to continue to utilize the advantages of the Zoom technology for the dissemination of courses specifically, but also in terms of just sort of our actions and interactions. So like I'm right now on the PhD committee for a student who's in Australia, and I was able to be part of the, you know, part of the committee conversation simply by, you know, zooming into a meeting. And so we're having those same kinds of conversations in terms of, you know, are we going to be delivering full degrees in this modality, in this synchronous but remote modality? So I think that's a really important important conversation, not just for cities, but for, you know, for all organizations in terms of the way that they're going to be operating post-pandemic. But more specifically to the answer to your question, you know, I think that there's data skills that are needed at all levels. So there's going to be the individuals who, and I put up on the chat that ASU is going to be launching a data science degree. Probably, I'm not sure exactly the timing of it, but it's an undergraduate degree where somebody might focus on, you know, biomedical data science. They might focus on psychology, data science, or in on our area, Patricia and I work in geographic data science, so we focus a lot on the mapping side of it. And you've got the one end of it, which is, you know, a deep knowledge. So the people who come in and who are going to be building those visualization tools and really part of the design of the data collection and the dissemination on it. But I also think that there are other levels. So also people who are going to be have some knowledge of what the data is and what the data are, and being able to understand what those skills are. So being able to pull together a visualization is not sort of a, you know, if you watch, you know, television at all, you know, it's like 5 clicks and then you've got this incredible visualization. And the reality behind it, of course, is that it takes a lot more effort. And so having skill sets by students who have that awareness, because they might become the managers or the mayors who are helping to deliver that, and having some level of understanding is going to be important as well. So it's again, it's a range. It's being aware and literate to being an expert. Some of it is formal classwork, some of it's formal degree programs, some of it is, as suggested here, you know, a mentor relationship or internship kinds of relationships. There's lots of ways to get that information, but you know, one course is going to be a great way to get people started to, you know, and it's painful for some, but it's really good to be to get started with it.
Yeah, completely agree. And maybe just to ask as a follow-on for cities, for communities, you know, how can a community best engage with ASU, and especially all the work you're doing? You know, Mayor Woods has done a fantastic job at proactively engaging with ASU, but maybe, you know, if you're a management analyst in Goodyear, or, you know, a budget analyst in Glendale that needs help in data, how can they reach out to Kerr and get involved?
You are asking the $1 million question here, because I think that that's actually the consistent problem that I hear, is that, you know, ASU is a large complex organization and people go, I want to know how to engage with blank. And there isn't sort of a one-stop, you know, figure out how to get to the right person solution yet. And, you know, we've got some people who are actively working on that in terms of how do you get somebody to the right person. And we don't yet have that, we don't have that solution in place. As far as Kerr is concerned, and Patricia and I are pretty well networked across the university, they can certainly reach out to, anybody here can reach out to one or both of us. And if we don't have the answers, we can certainly work hard to try to find the right person that has the answers. But we wish we had the answer. We wish the answer existed to the question that, we don't have sort of the Google search engine for all things ASU in terms of who to contact, because that would be fantastic if we did.
Maybe that's a challenge for one of the students listening in the audience right there. Before I turn it over to Sam to give you a preview of the rest of the day and the agenda, Mayor Woods, any last final thoughts, final words for the audience about data and the importance of data in cities?
No, actually, I would just say, I just appreciate everyone, being here today and listening and engaging in a really great conversation. And I mean, data is an incredibly important part of my life, both personally and professionally. And I know it is for the entire council and all of our city staff. And I know it's important for our residents to know exactly how we make decisions. And they are based on data and not just, frankly, the whims of 7 elected people. So, I think it's critically important that we continue this conversation and keep using data when making decisions moving forward as it pertains to public policy, and just continue to kind of keeping the relationships going that we've developed within this group today. So just wanted to thank you so much for having me be a part of this today.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Mayor. It couldn't put it any better. So I just want to give us, a tremendous thanks to all the panelists for joining. David, thanks for joining all the way from England. Really appreciate it. This was fantastic. Hopefully everyone found that insightful. And of course, please reach out to Brian or myself for any questions or comments or concerns. So without further ado, thank you again. And I'll turn it over to Sam to give that preview for the rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, what a panel. I am so inspired for the rest of the day, which is great news because we still have the rest of the full day left. So just a quick preview. You heard a keynote from Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College the other day. We are releasing a new installment of our Shaping EDU Open Access Journal. So look out for that later today in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College Current Issues in Education website. We'll also be sharing the link via Slack, eBlast, and social later. So just a shameless plug for the Shaping EDU Open Access Journal. And then, of course, we have our series of fun activities today. And we're starting with a hackathon. Let me just get that page up. We have our keynote, and something just to note, this button is going to change from join now to watch the recording in the next couple of days. And the same could be said for nearly all of our sessions across the winter games. So if you're sitting here thinking, well, I really enjoyed today's keynote, if they've all been like this, sign me up. Well, don't worry, we've got you covered on the January 5th and 6th sessions you may have missed. Finally, moving on, at 10:45 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, we have an exciting hackathon. The future is fun, the transformational power of play. I'm really excited to have my really dear friend, Dave Thomas from University of Denver joining us, along with Lisa Forbes, and they're gonna be running a hackathon on how to incorporate more fun into teaching and learning, which is, I think, something we can all agree on no matter what happens in 2021. We need to all be having more fun. Then there's a whole series of Olympic breakout sessions. I want to spotlight the one being led by Zoom. Hopefully you had a chance to crash the global concert last night and rock out. If not, that will be live on our YouTube channel later. But Zoom is also hosting cross-country ski across campus. And there's going to be a bunch of people from different universities talking about their various kind of strategies and how it relates to what the future of smart campuses looks like. We also have a session being hosted by AWS, Curling with the Cloud. So for all you curling fans, you're not going to want to miss this one. It really kind of dispels myths around the word disruption and kind of grounds it more in conversations about using the cloud for speed, scale, and agility. In one session I'm extremely excited about, humanizing teaching and learning is a main tenet, an action of Shaping EDU. So I can't wait to hear about the session that Lee Wolf is hosting. We care a lot, humanizing teaching through technology. And then another choice for your 10:45 session is learning with embodied avatars in the future. And this is being led by our 2 former innovators in residence, Emery Craig and Maya Georgieva. Those of you who are familiar with the Shaping EDU community may know them really well. They've been our resident extended reality experts and have led us through actually our immersive learning project and how to humanize immersive learning previously. So you're not going to want to miss that session if all things XR excite you. Now, but wait, there's more. We can't just end things after those breakouts. We have another round happening on the ice rink and on the slopes at 11:45. Our major co-convener, our lead co-convener, Cox Business, is presenting Citizens Broadband Radio Service. You're not going to want to miss this one at all. More about Internet of Things and the Citizens Band Radio Service specifically, and how it's enabling more community connectedness and innovation. Oh, this one I'm really excited about. Another colleague and dear friend, Dale Johnson, is leading through the University Design Institute, GAIN, building a collaborative MOOC model. This is going to be a really important topic, particularly as the hybrid and remote strategies are not going away anytime soon. In fact, they're only going to intensify, so come and learn from Dale. Emily Ray and Kari Whaley are hosting virtual playdates. How do you turn your classroom into a creative sandbox? Gain an understanding of cross-departmental collaboration. And just this is a breakout where you get to actually engage in collaborative activity as a way of actually seeing what works and what doesn't. And that's really it for our breakout sessions. And we hope you're going to join us for lunch, brunch, dinner, wherever you, depending on where in the world you're tuning in from. We've had a number of hackathons this week, I think 4 or 5 to be specific. And we realized not everyone has had a chance to join every single hackathon. And what makes a hackathon different often from a breakout is there are outcomes or something has been created. So if you are interested in seeing what the outcomes have been from these very productive and exciting hackathons, please do join us for Productively Yours at lunch today. We have an Olympic breakout session at a special time, 2 p.m. I know normally they're happening in the morning. So this is, I just want to flag, this is a special time happening today since this is the closing day. Automated mobility in the future of cities. You're not going to want to miss this one. Our own Di and Dom are moderating it. So come one, come all. We're going to have a concluding fireside chat, reflections at the top, hosted by our own Allison and Kyle from our Learning Experience group at the University Technology Office. They're going to help kind of bring all of this together. So even if you had only had a chance to come to a couple sessions, this is really going to be the time when it comes together and you hear about the main outcomes and lessons learned to bring into 2021 from all of the Winter Games. And then finally, we can't let you go without a closing ceremony. Of course, the torch is never really going to go out if we're doing it right. So join us at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for the Carrying the Forward the Torch and Medal ceremony, where not only are we going to be hearing from you and building a collaborative kind of scrapbook on what our best memories are and what we want to carry forward into 2021, but also we'll be giving out special awards and you just may win one. So make sure to show up. That is all for now. A quick about 9-minute humanity break, and then we'll see you on the slopes and at the ice rink for the 10:45 sessions. Thank you so much to our panelists and have a great day.